Hello from Abu Dhabi, dear Motorsport-Magazin friends and Formula One fans. After all the hustle and bustle in Las Vegas, it's almost a little more tranquil here, even if it's hard to believe with the sight of this hotel behind me. The first parties on the boats are already starting. Nevertheless, compared to Las Vegas, the season finale is a little more tranquil. The action on the course will probably also be tranquil. To be honest, the track is never really good for great racing, but today's media day was a real buzz, and there was one topic that dominated the media day, namely Lewis Hamilton versus Christian Horner. The Red Bull team boss said something very interesting in an interview with the Daily Mail, namely that Lewis Hamilton had spoken to Red Bull and that Lewis Hamilton had approached Red Bull. All this, of course, before the contract extension with Mercedes was signed. Lewis Hamilton was then asked about it today, and he said, no, that's not true. He didn't do that. He didn't approach Red Bull, and he also checked again with his own team to see whether anyone from his camp had spoken to Red Bull, and he said, no, that's not true. Quite the opposite. Red Bull would have tried it with him, and then it got a bit adventurous. Lewis Hamilton almost sounded like a politician, almost a bit like Olaf Scholz or an Austrian politician who likes to drive his laptop around in a baby carriage. He said that he had found an old cell phone at home with his old number on it, had turned it on, and then there were hundreds of messages on it, including one from Christian Horner, and he said in this message, yes, let's talk. He then wrote back belatedly at some point, congratulating him on their great season and so on, and then nothing more came of it. So, quite an interesting statement. Testimony against testimony, as they always say. Who do you believe? I don't want to pass judgment on that, but Lewis Hamilton has also made it clear that he would have no problem being Max Verstappen's teammate. That would obviously be an absolute highlight for all motorsport fans, probably not for the two of them. But Lewis Hamilton has said he has no problem, but Max Verstappen probably does, and they have a special history here, especially in Abu Dhabi. Hamilton came out of Abu Dhabi 2021 as the loser, Max Verstappen as the winner. But Max Verstappen was asked about it in the press conference, but he didn't really want to come out with it. He didn't want to say it wasn't a problem for him, but there were just far too many ifs and so on. But if you remember the interview with Dr. Helmut Marko on our channel, when we talked about this great team, I asked Dr. Helmut Marko about Lewis Hamilton, and the doctor said, it doesn't work with everyone, but with Lando Norris, for example, he could well have imagined it, but it got a bit more adventurous because Christian Horner also mentioned in the interview with colleagues that Lewis Hamilton almost ended up at Ferrari. There were also in-depth discussions with John Elkann. Lewis Hamilton confirmed that he and John Elkann are good acquaintances, i.e. the Ferrari boss, the president, and yes, he has known him for a long time. There is contact from time to time, but nothing specifically about contractual matters. The same applies to Fred Vasseur, of course, who was his team principal at ART in Formula 2. And it's clear that they still talk from time to time, but not in terms of the contract. But he himself would have told team boss Toto Wolff about it after this story came out, at least because everything was told and everything should be fine. He doesn't want to create a bad atmosphere at Mercedes in the team. So it's an interesting story that came to light at the season finale. Who is right? It doesn't really matter. There was at least contact, whether from one side or the other. I've just talked about Toto Wolff, for whom there was still trouble here. And for Fred Vasseur too, for his friend, for his buddy. The two of them are good friends, and what was the trouble for Las Vegas? You remember the press conference that was held there? It was a memorable press conference. Fred Vasseur really pissed off after what happened to Carlos Sainz with the manhole cover, and Toto Wolff telling a colleague, incidentally the very colleague who did this story now, with Christian Horner and Lewis Hamilton, John McAvoy from the Daily Mail. Yes, there was this incident, and both of them were heard again here by the stewards. They were summoned for their language at the press conference, so the FIA was not concerned with the content that was discussed there. There was no trouble because Toto Wolff said that nobody in Europe watches free practice at that time anyway. It wasn't about Fred Vasseur complaining that it was unfair and so on. No, it was just about the language. The two of them were swearing, and that's why they were heard by the stewards here. There was a report from the FIA media delegate. That's why the whole thing had to be looked at again. In the end, there was a warning. I think we can leave it at that. I don't even know if Günther Steiner always pulls himself together in the FIA press conferences, because in his own media sessions or in TV broadcasts or whatever, the TV stations are responsible. But now it was about the fact that it was an FIA press conference. And that's why the FIA had to deal with this issue. So I think Günther Steiner has been warned by now at the latest. He is afraid that he will be the first to receive this €1 million fine, which now exists according to the regulations or the International Sporting Code. There was one big piece of news yesterday. Mick Schumacher will be racing again in 2024, not in Formula One, but in the World Endurance Championship for Alpine. It's a great story, of course. Mick's father, Michael Schumacher, has also raced in the World Sports Car Championship with that legendary Sauber Mercedes. He then moved into Formula One. Mick Schumacher is trying to come back via the World Endurance Championship. It's also Alpine, Renault, a former team of Michael, with whom he became world champion back then as Benetton. Yes, that's the Formula One team. The other one is now a Le Mans team or an endurance team. In the end, it's not Team and Stone. But for the sake of our well-rounded story, let's have some fun here. Mick Schumacher is also here, of course. He is still the Mercedes reserve driver. He will retain this role into 2024, so the whole thing runs in parallel. And because he is here, he has of course also spoken to us in the media and explained the move. He has made no secret of the fact that it's not the best thing for him in terms of driving. He has already completed a test, and he says the car is heavy. He almost feels a bit claustrophobic in it with the roof, and it's quite unusual for him not to get any wind on his helmet. He's not used to that. But he didn't want to just sit on the bench for another year. He said it's been tough this year. He's always raced for 14 years, and now to just not race at all for a year, that was tough. And that's why he really wanted to get back in the cockpit. Of course, he also wants to remain race fit for Mercedes if such an opportunity should arise. And it has to be said that the WEC is currently experiencing a real boom. Many manufacturers are coming. Well-known manufacturers are already involved. Ferrari won the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year. There was also great competition from Toyota and Porsche. Of course, the fact that Ferrari won there was also in big parts due to the BOP. But Alpine may also benefit from this next year. It's a car in the LMDH class, so it's not a hypercar. You always have to differentiate a little. Alpine's commitment is therefore not really comparable with that of Ferrari or Toyota, for example. But of course it is still the top class. Teamwork is of course required. There is a difference to Formula One, even if we are always told that it is a huge team and so on. Nevertheless, the drivers are egotists here, so Mick Schumacher also has to learn teamwork. Although he did say that it worked quite well with Kevin Magnussen, he already had this teamwork intuition. He also drove long-distance races and shared cars. But Mick Schumacher also says that it's not just a team. Of course, the focus is still on individual performance, and that is also taken into account when it comes to returning to Formula One. He has also considered other racing series and weighed them up. Super Formula in Japan, for example, or somehow heading west, so probably IndyCar. But what speaks against it? He doesn't want to leave the Formula One cosmos completely. He wants to stay involved. His commitment to Mercedes remains. Sure, some races will overlap, but at least he'll stay in this circus. And Alpine is also involved in Formula One. That certainly also spoke in his favor. If you're looking for a new job like Mick Schumacher, then apply to us. We are looking for reinforcements, for example, in the position of video host. You can find all the information on jobs.motorsport-magazin.com. The link is, of course, also in the video description. I would be delighted if you could send us an application. But now we still have to talk about this weekend. And tomorrow is the practice day, but it's not a normal practice day. 10 drivers will actually be in the car in the first free practice session who wouldn't otherwise be in the car. Rookie commitments are mandatory this season, or have been since last year. Every team has to vacate a cockpit twice a season, and Red Bull takes it to the extreme. Neither Max Verstappen nor Sergio Perez drive in the first free practice session, but Jake Dennis and Isaac Hadjar. Why? It's the last race of the season. The regular drivers know the car quite well. Of course, there is also a lot of testing here. There will also be another test afterwards. Of course, we will still be on site and report on it. And the first session takes place in daylight, so it's not particularly representative. However, it is particularly exciting because 5 of the 10 drivers who are in action are actively driving in Formula 2. And in Formula 2, qualifying takes place 30 minutes after the end of the first free practice session. And the Formula 2 paddock is also at the other end, so that's a logistical challenge. I'm looking forward to it. For Theo Pourchaire and Frederick Vesti, the championship is still at stake. I'm curious to see if that has any effect. Ollie Behrman, who also drives in Formula 2 and drives Kevin Magnussen's Haas, said it's not ideal. You don't have a debrief with the Formula 1 team either. That's why I think you might have to think about something, at least in the future. If you're going to push for this to happen, there should also be a more sensible schedule. But now we're looking forward to the season finale here in Abu Dhabi. I'm curious to see how the juniors will do in the first free practice session. And then I'm curious to see how the long runs and so on will go in the second free practice session.